If you are a guest, my name is Dan. I am the teaching pastor here, and I get the opportunity to open up God's Word. I believe it is real. It is relevant still for our lives today. It's something important. It's God's instruction manual, if you will, for our lives. We started a series last week, and that series is called The Greatest Sermon. We began to take a look at something that's commonly called the Sermon on the Mount. It's one of the longest recorded sermons that Jesus gave right at the very beginning of his ministry. Last week we talked about what the purpose was of the Sermon on the Mount. And while Jesus' original audience may have taken something different out of it, for us as Christians today, it really talks a lot about how we are to live our life today in our culture, in our world. How do we live the Christian life? And there's a lot of things within the Sermon on the Mount that are going to be like fingernails down the chalkboard. They're going to drive you crazy because they are so counterintuitive to what your flesh or your heart desires. But yet, it's what we're called to. And it's not about do's and don'ts. It's really about what's in the heart of it. What's at the heart of all of this? So, last week we talked about being salt and light. Salt was very important in Jesus' day. We talked about the fact that salt was a preservative, that it was something that delayed decay. They put it on meat and because they had no refrigerators. So, and we talked about how Christianity has over time delayed decay in society. It's something where we stand up for what's right and just and pleases God's heart, and it delays decay of our world. And not just that, it adds flavor. But we also talked about being light. Light reveals direction. It shows things, and it helps us around in the dark, which is really important. On top of that, we said that light attracts. We should be attractive. So as we move on into another portion of what Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount, we want to take a look. I'm going to skip ahead a chapter, and then we'll go back to chapter 5. We're going to skip to chapter 6, and the reason I'm doing that is there's a season coming up that some of you, depending on your background, may resonate with, but I wanted to sort of take the opportunity while we're walking into it to talk about this. So now, I have almost become not anti-news. I rarely check the news anymore. I used to be a newsaholic. It would be on from the moment I woke up. I'd be watching it all day. I'd be watching it in the background. I'd be listening to it. I'd go home. I'd watch it all night, watch all the talk shows and all this stuff. I was a newsaholic. I'm recovering, and I've gotten over most of it because who wants to watch news anymore? I mean, come on. It depresses me. So I have, however, I still have a couple websites that I'll check throughout the day just so I'm aware of what's going on in our world. So it's not unusual for me, as I'm looking at these news websites, every week to see a story about somebody who did something because they were desperate for something. Here's what I mean. I'm going to give you a few examples over the last month or two of stories that I came across. There was a 17-year-old man in Asia who desperately wanted an iPad. Desperately wanted an iPad. His parents would not buy it. They couldn't afford it. So he did what any of us would. He went online, he figured out the whole black market thing and offered to sell his kidney on the black market so that he could buy an iPad. And so they sent their surgeon over. That's probably not a good idea. Came over and removed his kidney, and surprise, surprise, he's having serious health issues ever since. I mean, who would have thought that the person they sent over probably wasn't a surgeon? He sold it. I guess he got his iPad, but now he has serious problems. And you look at that, you're like, really? It's an iPad. Come on. How about this one? This is actually, I think, about 2-3 years old now. 28-year-old woman really wanted to get her kids a brand new Nintendo Wii game console. And her kids really wanted this, and, parents, we want to please our kids. Well, she knew they couldn't afford it. But the radio station that she listened to out in California was having a contest. And this contest, they said the winner of this contest will win a brand new Nintendo Wii. And here's what you have to do. You got to show up at this spot. We're going to give you about 8-ounce things of water to drink every 15 minutes. And you're going to keep drinking and drinking. And the last person that has to go to the bathroom, you win it. Congratulations. So she shows up because she wants to make her family happy. And she partakes. And so she's drinking every 15 minutes. And it's down to her and one other lady. And her head's beginning to hurt. She beats the other lady. She gets the Nintendo Wii. She goes home. She is not feeling well. Her head is pounding. She goes to the hospital. She dies of something I didn't even know existed called water intoxication. She drank too much. She was not releasing it, and she died to make her kids happy for a Nintendo Wii. Now, I realize if she would have known that was even a possibility, I don't think she would have pushed herself as hard. I'm not trying to say that, she was unintelligent in any way, but how far will you go for something that you think is going to bring fulfillment, contentment, joy, and happiness? One last story. 66-year-old grandmother, about 2 years ago, was arrested in Maine for setting 18 fires. She was an arson. And they brought her in and they began to question her what the motivation was behind this. And they sat her down and she started to talk and she said, you know what, I've done a lot of nice things for people all my life, but I always seem to get overlooked. And I figured this was my way of finally getting people to pay attention to me. And so she went around and she started fires and burned things to the ground and damaged people's properties for one thing. She just wanted to be recognized. Now, we can look at all three of these stories, and if you're like me, you're like, oh man, put that in the humor file or something like that, or hey, I'm glad I'm not them file. I would never, ever do anything that dumb. But there's something within the human heart that we will go to full lengths for something that we think is going to bring us contentment and fulfillment. We will go to crazy lengths of stuff. That's why a commercial asked the question, what would you do for a Klondike bar? That's why Dan Aubin, confession time as a youth pastor, did what would you do for $1? And I had a student win $1 for, I had a Happy Meal and a blender. You blend up the Happy Meal and he drank it. He got $1 out of it. I know. I'm a horrible person. Go ahead. I'll get the emails this week. It was amazing what kids will do if you dare to. Anyway, people will do things crazy for things that they think will bring them happiness. Now, you may think, I would never do that for an iPad, a Nintendo Wii, attention, blah, 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 whatever it might be for you. But I think all of us have this in our life. I think all of us go to great lengths for things in our life to bring us fulfillment and happiness. It just may not be as drastic as some of the stories that I mentioned. How about this? You are at your job and you are tired of being passed over by other people that are brand new. You've been there for a long time. You deserve some attention for all the hard work you've done. So you begin to drive yourself to the level of workaholic. You begin working insane hours solely to try to get the attention of your bosses. Or you begin to belittle the people that you see getting promoted in hopes that you can chop them down so you can fill that spot. And you will go to whatever length it takes to do that. And so your family suffers because of all the hours you're working. You suffer physically because of the stress you're causing yourself. And all for something that if I just get this position, I'm going to be fulfilled, happy, content, and it's all going to be good. How about this? You want an image of yourself to be something that people want to be. You are obsessed with image. You want to look great. You want people to think you're wonderful and perfect and great. And so you will strive to any length possible to put on that image of perfection, no flaws, no mistakes. You will put yourself through countless tortures of weight loss, of exercise, which I'm allergic to, exercise. You will beat yourself and say, and not just that kind of stuff, but even stuff like you got to make sure that your car is perfectly clean. Wherever you go, it's got to look clean. You are always put together, top fashion. You wear something once and you throw it out and get something new. But it's about an image, and you're so driven that if I can present this image, it's going to give me joy, give me satisfaction. I will do whatever it takes. And then we pull our families into that. I have a family I remember in my previous years of ministry that was concerned about their appearance all the time. Like they were the family that when you saw them, they were all put together. They were beautiful. They were in shape. Their clothes were perfect and very high end, and you would look at them and you're like, man, this family just doesn't fail at anything. They have no mistakes. And when you get to the heart of the parents, you find out that they were driven by this image thing, and they would do whatever it took to put forward this image. They wanted to be the family that people looked to, and they wanted to be an example. How about this? How about financial sustainability? I don't want to say peace, because that's a class we have here, and I am all for that, but financial sustainability, that we don't ever have to worry about money. We've got it, we can do whatever we want, and we'll go to whatever likes. We just want to be peace with all of our money and not worry about it. And so it drives us to do crazy things. Work a lot of hours, I mentioned that, but as I have seen in the past, I have had people I know, friends, who have become addicted to gambling. Now, this isn't a talk about gambling or evil, good, anything like that, but the addiction that if I can just get this dollar amount, all will be good. It's all going to be together. Everything's going to be okay. And they go to great lengths, taking out debt to feed a gambling addiction. One last one, love. Sometimes when we are just desperate to be loved, sometimes we lower our standards. We will take a person that years before we would say there's no chance I would ever be with a person in a relationship romantically that is this way, has this characteristics, treats a person this way, blah, blah, blah. And yet, when we aren't finding love, all of a sudden we're like, well, maybe I can just manage it, or maybe I can change them. And so we will walk into a relationship with the person with that hope that maybe we can change them. Or, you know what, maybe it's not that bad. We begin to overlook things that we know in our heart of hearts it's not okay. Why? Because we want to be loved. So before we cast judgment on people giving kidneys and body parts for iPads and dying for a Nintendo Wii and all of this stuff, maybe we need to look at ourselves for the things that we're finding joy, contentment, and happiness in. And that's what brings us to today. As Jesus continues, he's going to talk about something that is frankly a foreign concept in our day and age, and it's this idea of fasting. Fasting. We're going to talk about what it is, how to do it, and all of that today. But my big idea today, just so you know, is simply this, that when I give up, I can be filled up. When I give up something, not give up as in I quit. When I give up something, I allow room, I declutter my life so it can be filled with something else. Wouldn't it be great if that thing that we're filling ourselves with is something that would actually fulfill us and give us contentment and give us peace and joy and all those great things that we're looking for in other things? When I give up, I can be filled up. Jesus is teaching his Sermon on the Mount. He's been teaching a while now. And later on in his Sermon on the Mount, we come across these verses. You can follow along on the Hope Church app with this. We're going to have them up here on the screen. You can also take notes on the back of your bulletin so you can recall them later. But in Matthew 6:16 to 18, it says this, "And when you fast, don't make it obvious, as the hypocrites do. For they try to look miserable and disheveled, so people will admire them for their fasting. I tell you the truth, that's the only reward they will ever get. But when you fast, comb your hair, wash your face. Then no one will notice that you are fasting, except for your Father, who knows what you do in private. And your Father, who sees everything, will reward you." Jesus starts off and says, "And when you fast." He doesn't say, "and you should fast," or "what if you fast." I also don't believe that Jesus meant this to be a legalistic thing that you must do this. But this was common to his audience. The Jewish audience that he was speaking to fasted often. It was part of high holidays like Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. This was something you did during those times. And it was of humility. It was of a desire for a relationship with God that they would deprive themselves of food for a period of time. It wasn't for any other reason other than to be humbled and submitted to God. And Jesus says here, "And when you fast," because you all fast, I know you do. When you all fast, don't make it obvious. Stop putting on the show. Stop trying to have people go, wow, they are super holy. Did you see them today? Yeah, I'm really hungry today. I'm fasting for God, and I haven't eaten in 7 days, 3 hours, and 22 minutes, but who's counting? They were people in this day, the hypocrites, the Pharisees, the religious leaders of the day would make sure everybody knew. They would probably even wear some makeup to put, some dark things under their eyes or whatever, so they'd look even worse than what they really were. Why? Because they wanted people to go, wow, you are so committed to God. Aren't you amazing? I hope to be like you. And they'd be, oh, no, I'm humble. I'm humble. And Jesus says here, you know what? That praise that they're getting from people, that's all the reward they're getting. That's it. You're going to get a pat on the back, and everyone's going to say, wow, you are the most holy person I've ever met in my life. And that's as far as it goes. Jesus says, no, when you fast, when you give up something so that you can be filled up with something, I want you to make sure nobody can even tell that you're fasting. You aren't broadcasting it on social media. You aren't telling people. You aren't hinting about it. So hopefully somebody asks a question. Well, I had to answer their question. Of course I'm fasting. Jesus said it's private. It's between you and God, because this is about your desire for intimacy with him. And so Jesus says do it in private. And guess what? God's going to reward you. As I said, what is fasting? Fasting was an Old Testament practice the Jewish people did, and it was to show submission to God. For us today, what does that mean? It means that we interrupt our normal routine of things that we, are just common and expected in our lives to point us to something that's even more necessary for our life or living. It's when we take a pause in routine to refocus on the thing that is most important to us. Hence giving up so that we can be filled up. And that filling up is to be a time focused on communion and dependence on God, of intimacy, of talking to him, of being with him when we give something up. I love John Piper's definition of this. John Piper is a very well-known pastor and author, and he says fasting is homesickness for God. Homesickness for God. I don't know if you've ever been homesick. I've had those moments in my past, and I was a camp counselor, and I had homesick kids all the time. I had 7- and 8-year-old boys that I oversaw, and I'd have a kid, and you could just sort of tell. They kind of would be off in the corner, and they'd sort of be crying, and so I'd go over and try and see what was going on, and no matter what I did to try to get that kid to get his mind off of, I want my bed, I want my parents, I want my car, I want my TV, blah, blah, blah. Whatever I would do to try to distract them, I very often failed. They were just so consumed with what they were missing in that moment. They desired what they had back home. I mean, even when I would get the nurse involved with her homesickness pills, they were Tums, we would give them a homesickness pill. It didn't work. They weren't falling for it. They saw right through it. Homesickness for God. Fasting is we are so caught up in him and our love for him that food? Pfft, who needs food? I want God. Piper goes on, he says this, half of Christian fasting is that our physical appetite is lost because our homesickness for God is so intense. The other half is that our homesickness for God is threatened because our physical appetites are so intense. Love this last line. The greatest enemy of hunger for God is not poison, but apple pie. What's he saying in here? The biggest thing that's going to compete with the hunger for God is not necessarily something that's like drastically bad, and you're like, oh yeah, I should never replace God with this. But it's that thing that looks kind of good, and it may not necessarily be bad, but it's enough to bring you fulfillment and contentment that's temporary. Just like a great old baked apple pie. They're great, they're wonderful, but they don't sustain you, and they do not fill you. And the contentment is only for a little bit. No matter how great the apple pie is that I've had, and I've eaten a lot of apple pies, and I intend to do more the rest of my life, it's still temporary. So be wary of those things that we are seduced by to give our trust and think that we'll find our contentment in. So my question then is, why do you fast? Why do you fast? Why does a person fast? Why would Jesus draw attention to this thing of fasting in the Sermon on the Mount? It seems so random. Some of us have reasons why we fast, if you've ever done it. Sometimes it's just a religious tradition. If you were raised in some traditions of the church, I know especially within the Catholic Church, we have Lent coming up that starts on Wednesday. Lent, not lint. That's something in your belly button. That's disturbing. Okay. Lent is a season, 40 days of giving up something to prepare yourself for Easter. Now, you might have been raised in that tradition. That's why you do it. Some of us were not. I was not raised in that tradition. But it's something I learned about later on in life, the motivation behind it. Maybe you fast for self-discipline. You want to prove to yourself that you can go so long without eating or whatever it is. You want to prove you're self-disciplined enough, or you want to grow in your self-discipline. Some people fast and give up food and other things out of repentance. You're broken about a life choice that you have made, and it just seems right that you don't eat until you have found that healing and peace from God, and so you give up whatever it is so that you can connect intimately with God. Another reason that people fast is they have an important prayer request. They have an important prayer request. And so they say, God, I need this request answered one way or another. And so they fast, and what happens is that if they give up food at the time that they'd normally be eating, they dedicate it to prayer for that prayer request. Now, that's not a guarantee it will be answered, and I'll talk about that in a second. That's not a guarantee it will be answered. But it is about finding intimacy and communion with God again. And sometimes people fast out of mourning. This was biblical. You see this all over the place in the Old Testament, especially, that when something horrible would happen, a battle would be lost, a person would die. It said that the nation would fast out of mourning, that they were just so caught up in the grief of whatever it was that they would give up even their own food. But we have to remember that the main reason for fasting should always be a realization of our dependence upon God and a desire to be close to Him. It's about intimacy with Him and closeness with Him. Remember, it's not enough to just throw something out. We must be filling that void up with something, and let's fill it up with the right thing, God. But there are some wrong motivations. There are some people who have a hunger strike as one of their motivations. God, I really need this prayer request answered, and I am not going to eat until you answer it. It sounds like, my children, that if you don't let me do this, I'm going to hold my breath until you let it happen. And we treat God that way. We go on a hunger strike to try to force God's hand. That's not fasting. That's a power play. And that's not all right. That's not all right at all. That's one wrong motivation that we sometimes have as we approach fasting. Another, I have here an opportunity for self-righteousness. Jesus talked about this. An opportunity for self-righteousness. You're trying to show off an image of how great and holy and committed to God you are. And, so you fast and you make sure everybody knows it. And you look down upon them and, you've only fasted for 2 hours. Wow, I'm on my second day. And I say that sort of jokingly, but at the same time, man, sometimes we can just be so arrogant about our self-righteousness. I mean, we can be so arrogant. That's a wrong motivation. Another wrong motivation, and I have an asterisk with this one. Weight loss, overcoming addiction. Well, I'm just going to give up food. And the motivation isn't that I'm giving up food or giving up smoking or something that's addictive. The motivation isn't giving it up to be filled up. It's just I'm going to give it up. And we don't fill that void. And oftentimes when you do that, you end up falling right back into it. The point of fasting wasn't to give up addiction or to give up food and lose weight and getting a great body and all this stuff. It was finding intimacy and dependence on God. Those things that we find joy and contentment in, cut them out and replace them with something that's better for us. Also, I have this one, religious empty tradition. You just do it because someone made you do it or just because you do it, and you don't really care about what the motivation is. Tell you a story of this. I attended a Bible college a couple hours from here, and the founder of the school passed away. And the leaders of the school that were left behind were like, we really need to seek God as to what the future of this school is and who should be the leader, etc. So we're going to put it out there for the school body, which is about 1,000 students. They're like, we want you all to consider fasting with us so that God will speak to us and show us the direction that we should go as a school. And they said, we want you to sign up. Out of 1,000 students, 50 signed up. So the leadership comes back and says, okay, we're closing the cafeteria for lunch and dinner. You will fast. And they made the student body fast. That is not a right motivation. To force somebody into it is not at all. And just so you know, the pizza restaurant right outside of the school had a heck of a lot of business that night. And I was one of them because I was troubled by the fact that they thought you could force us to do something because we didn't answer the way that they wanted, or not enough people did. Those are wrong motivations. So how do you fast? How do you fast? How, if you decide it's something between you and the Lord that you feel led on your heart that you should fast, how should you do it? I have 3 real quick, easy steps, but I want to build on these. First, set a time. Set a time. This means how long you're going to do it for as well as what day you're going to start it. Set a time. If you don't pick a day, you're going to just keep saying, yeah, I really want to fast. And then in a week, yeah, I really want to fast. And then in a month, same thing. In a year, you'll never get around to it. When you put it on paper, when you put it on a calendar, it sticks a lot more. Also, that thing of set the amount of time. How long are you doing this? 12 hours? There is no wrong answer to this one, just so you know. 12 hours? 12 days? What is it for you that how long do you want to do this fast? Again, seeking God in this time and intimacy with Him. Second thing, clarify what you're giving up. Now, I've mentioned the food fast a lot. That seems to be the most common, that you give up eating. Maybe all meals, maybe breakfast, lunch, and you eat dinner. Whatever it is, it's between you and the Lord, and you decide to give up food. I also, though, know some have dietary concerns, and you can't do that, and that's totally fine. So there can be other things that you give up as a fast with this, something to give up so you can be filled up. The way to identify maybe what that is for you is to ask yourself this question: what is something that my happiness has become dependent on that I can replace with communion with God? What is something that your happiness, you think of giving this up and you're like, oh my word, I could never give that up. Not watching ESPN for 5 hours? What are you thinking? Whatever it is for you, the thing that brings that dependence and happiness for you, and you are willing to give it up for one reason: communion with God. Think of what it is for you. Maybe it is TV. Maybe it's radio. Maybe it's, oh, here we go, coffee. Yeah, I just went there. Oh, yeah. Whatever it is, social media, that one may be a blessing. Okay, you get the idea. What is it that keeps giving you find fulfillment and contentment in? And the reality is it's really temporary. It's really temporary. It's not giving you what you really need, which you can only get from communion with God. And then lastly, plan for what you will do during these times, because it's not enough to say, well, I'm just giving up. Now we've got to fill that time up. What is it you're doing during these times? If you're giving up, we'll say the food fast. Is it you're going to fill those times with prayer, intentional prayer, praying for other people, praying for you if there's a request that is on your heart? Is it just a time of worship that maybe you pull up a playlist of just good, solid worship music like you hear here, and you just want to fill those times and just be with God and connect with Him? Maybe it's time meditating on His Word. You just spend that time connecting with Him and being with Him and spending time with Him instead of that other thing that you've been finding joy, happiness, contentment, fulfillment out of. Whatever it is, plan for it. Because if you don't plan for it, then all you are doing is giving up, and that's missing the whole point of fasting. What results come from it? There's the number. Growth and intimacy with God. Growth and intimacy with God. When you spend that much time focusing completely on Him, it does things, and it grows your relationship. Not just that, you find a renewed love for Him. And not just a renewed love for Him, but you begin to have identified for you the idols that have built up in your life the things that you have been seeking to find, happiness and joy and fulfillment, all of a sudden, those things are going to be revealed when we start to focus on our love for God. I love the way that it was put. There's an old theologian named John Calvin. John Calvin said this. He said, your heart is an idol factory, I-D-O-L. It's an idol factory. We have no problems as human. It's part of the human condition of finding a new idol or creating a new idol or something that we're like, this will give me happiness. This will give me fulfillment. And we have this problem even as Christians. Those that have chosen to follow Christ, we still, just like the children of Israel back in the Old Testament, find a golden calf somewhere. And we may even build the golden calf ourselves. Something that we will try to find fulfillment out of. And so when we have those revealed to us, it is convicting, and we realize there's things that we need to refocus our life on. Sometimes out of fasting, you will have answered prayer and clarity. Catch this. Sometimes you will have answered prayer or fasting. You may go into fasting because there is a request that is on your heart, and I have done this. But I will also tell you that there have been times I've gone in and had a period of fasting in my life where it was because of a certain prayer request, and at the end of it, guess what? I didn't have an answer. But you know what I did have? I had communion with God, and I felt a peace about things, no matter how he answered it going forward. Sometimes he brings us clarity in those moments, but it's not a guarantee, and that should not be the reason we go into it, because then you're back into that whole food hunger strike thing. It's all about Jesus and being with him. So I close with this. Your challenge this week is just a question to ask yourself. Ask yourself, what can't I give up for what I shouldn't give up? What in your life will you say, I cannot give up for something you shouldn't give up? Now, I'm not expecting after this morning that everyone's going to go and start a fast. And I would tell you, don't do it right away. You need to prayerfully consider this for however long it is. This is something between you and the Lord. That's what Jesus said. It's a private matter. I'm encouraging you to consider it. But we're also not going to be legalistic here and say you've never fasted. Oh, that's a shame. How can you be a part of the church or be a Christian? That's not it at all. Consider it for the sake of intimacy and dependence on God and relationship building with him. What can't you give up? What is that thing that you cannot give up for the thing that you shouldn't give up? It's been about 5-6 years ago. I mentioned earlier, I was not raised in a tradition that did Lent. Some of you are familiar. Some of you even have plans to do Lent as of this Wednesday. I like Fat Tuesday because I get to eat a lot of really bad food. But anyway, we Lent, I learned about a couple years ago, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting concept, that you give up something so that you can spend extra time with God, going before him and building a relationship with him. So I made a decision for me that was very difficult. It was not food. I've done food. I made the decision that I would not listen to music in my car for 40 days. Now, if you know Dan Albin, I live, breathe music constantly. There is not a lot of music I don't listen to. I listen to Middle Eastern singers who are singing in Arabic, and I don't know what on earth they're singing, but it sounds really cool, and I like it. The only type of music I don't listen to is country. That's a whole other thing altogether. I'm giving that up for Lent. I'm kidding. But I decided this was a big step for me because I had about 30 minutes a day I'd be in my car. And it was just going to be silent in there. But I did this intentionally so that while I drove, I would pray. I would talk to God. And this is early cell phone days where you didn't have the thing in the ear so you could get away with saying, yeah, I was talking to my cell phone. No, I was going to be talking out loud in my car 30 minutes a day, anytime I drove anywhere, to God. And I'll tell you, the first week was rough. But by the end of it, it was like, why do I listen to music in my car? I have this opportunity here to spend just talking to God. And there's still days. I had one this past week where I just didn't turn the radio on. I was taking a long drive, and I just talked to God because I wanted that intimacy with him. And that is what fasting is all about. Not just giving up, but filling up on that which is most important. And I hope you will prayerfully consider sometime in the future to do the same. because I want to see you grow in your love for Jesus. Let's pray. Father, thank you for such a thing as fasting. It's a discipline. It's a difficult discipline. It's not a popular discipline, but it is an opportunity for us to focus on our growth and our relationship with you, to be intimate, to hear from you, to experience you, to see you through an extended period of time. And Lord, I ask this morning you would challenge some in two ways. One, that they may consider this not for the sake of good deeds or this is going to get me to heaven and make me a good Christian, but that they would do it just out of a desire, a homesickness for you. And Lord, for many of us, if not all of us, Lord, that you would reveal the idols of our heart that we have produced and created, that we continue to look for fulfillment and contentment and joy and value out of, that is not you. And Lord, that you would reveal them to us, and Lord, that we would begin the process of doing battle against the idols in our very own hearts. Jesus, we love you, and we want to know you more. And we ask this all in your name. Amen.